sailing the world is full of life-changing experiences.
Por la casa.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
But there's a dark side to seeking adventure in unfamiliar waters.
The fact is that violent crimes do occur against cruisers.
Could chasing this dream actually be the biggest mistake of our lives?
Like, my heart was pounding. I'm like, oh, do we get the knife? And I looked over and there's just a face.
Previously on Project Atticus.
After spending 3 years refitting our fixer-upper sailboat, we left the United States with only $2,000 and the goal of working while we cruised. We made it as far as Isla Mujeres, Mexico, before we ran out of money and had to find work. For the next year, we did freelance boat repair jobs until we saved up enough cash to cast the lines and sail south to explore the Western Caribbean. So a question that we get a lot living aboard Atticus full-time, is sailing the world dangerous from a crime perspective?
Living at anchor in all kinds of different countries, all kinds of situations, are we more at risk? In our experience, the last 5 years exploring the Western Caribbean, we have not had any incidents of theft. We've had no violent interactions with people.
And of all the sailors that we've met over the last 5 years, we've only met 2 people personally who had any kind of encounter with crime. One of them was an attempted dinghy theft. The couple was down below, they heard stuff on deck, came up on deck and saw that somebody's swimming away with their dinghy. They hopped in, recovered the dinghy, everything was fine. And the other incident was a couple of friends of ours, they left their boat out at anchor, they didn't lock it, and when they came back to the boat, a bunch of stuff was stolen.
So in our experience, crime against cruisers is very rare. When it does occur, apparently it's mostly just petty theft, but the fact is that more violent crimes do occur against cruisers. Just a couple 100 miles away from here in Nombre de Dios, Panama, there's been several incidents of, violence against sailors at anchor. One in particular, the couple was down below cooking dinner. Bunch of guys boarded the boat all at once with guns, beat them up a little bit, tied them up, stole everything from the boat. Luckily, they survived. They weren't hurt too bad. But there's plenty of reports that are more gruesome, that involve people getting raped, getting murdered. So then the question kind of becomes, what should we make of that? Is it something that we need to be afraid of? Should we take lots of really intense precautions and not trust people? Or should we try to completely ignore the risk of crime and try to trust everybody that we encounter and, for the most part, just leave it up to fate? And it's a good question, and we've been kind of mulling it over for the last 5 years. Something that we've learned from doing a lot of research on this topic, these crimes are very clustered. And a lot of that's going to be occurring in areas that are near cities where there's already drug gangs and already a good amount of violence and criminal activity.
But what we actually love to do on Atticus is get off-grid, completely be surrounded by nature, get away from civilization, find places where we can really immerse ourselves in the local wildlife, spearfish every day for food, find hidden adventures, and get to see ridiculously beautiful scenery. And in theory, if we're off-grid and away from civilization and away from people, then we really shouldn't have to worry about crime. But the thing is, there are people everywhere. There's going to be people living in fish camps in the middle of nowhere, fishing full-time. There's going to be indigenous communities living in the mangroves or in the jungle, completely living off the land.
One of the big reasons why we want to explore off-grid in these remote places is to meet those kinds of indigenous people. To experience that culture is a huge goal of ours. But when we first started cruising these remote areas, it was really intimidating because we were completely on our own. We knew that there would be absolutely no help if someone was to get violent or if we were to have some sort of a dodgy interaction with somebody. Just being separated from civilization, we weren't used to not having that safety net.
I remember the first time our boat was approached by these guys in a little canoe. They were kayaking over to Atticus. We were in Cuba. And and they looked kind of startled, and so
like almost like afraid.
Yeah, and I looked afraid, I'm sure. Like they were probably reacting to me, like my heart was pounding. I'm like, oh, do we get the knife or the pepper? Like, what do I do?
You're like, this is it.
Yeah.
It's happening.
It was like terrifying. ¿Ustedes viven cerca de aquí? Ah, okay. And now I look back on it and I'm just like, you're an idiot. They were just seeing if you wanted to buy lobster.
¿Langosta getting?
Do we want lobster, bud?
Sure.
¿Qué precio tienen?
No. ¿Precio ron tienen?
In Cuba, the big thing was they were always trying to trade for rum.
Yeah, it worked really well for us because we just stocked up on really cheap big bottles of rum.
Por la casa.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
And so we ate a lot of fish and lobster in Cuba. That's good.
That's a situation where, you don't want to be naive, so you don't want to be taken advantage of, you don't want to be unprepared, but you also don't want to be paranoid. And so we've kind of learned, particularly if it's during the day, like to really be trusting of people. But at night, it's kind of a different story. So we just feel like nothing good is going to come from having visitors at night. What was that?
I don't know. Ooh.
Lots of noises. Right now we have a false sense of security because we're well lit, the boat is pretty well lit, but we can't see our surroundings whatsoever. I mean, it's just pitch black to us because our night vision is so bad right now. You could roll up on a kayak and be 10 feet that way, and I would not see you at all. And if you were quiet enough, you could probably get all the way up to the boat without us really knowing.
And in fact, that has happened to us. We were out here eating dinner. We heard maybe like the knocking of a boat sound, and we like kind of looked, didn't see anything, and then maybe a little bit of splashing, and I looked over and there's just a face.
Like right there.
No, he was just like watching us with like no expression, and it.
Yeah, he didn't even make a sound.
Yeah. It was like serial killer face. I just freaked out. I just screamed, and then he screamed. And he was just trying to sell us some things from his canoe, but it was really freaky.
The thing to keep in mind too is that if you're in your house in civilization and somebody is in your backyard and staring at you through your back window, you should probably call the cops. Whereas where we are, we're in this kid's backyard. He's on his way home from night fishing maybe. Maybe he had wanted to come trade with us during the day but was busy. I mean, maybe he was kind of sketchy and sort of sussing out the situation. That's totally possible too. But we just can't rule out the possibility that he was well-intentioned, right? And we can't instantly treat him like a thief. And so that's why our new nighttime security weapon of choice is this, relatively bright spotlight. With the spotlight, we're able to make sure they know that we know that they're there. Basically take the advantage away from them. But we do want to be prepared for the day that we might run into somebody who does have bad intentions. And so we have come up with a handful of strategies that we think will help mitigate our risk. So of all the things that could be relatively easily stolen from a cruising sailboat, the outboard engine is probably going to be the most valuable and easiest to steal. So every single night we raise this outboard up off of the dinghy and put it in chocks on our cabin top, and then we'll suspend the dinghy to get it up out of the water, make sure we don't get any growth on the bottom. So although it's extremely rare, we do need to be concerned about people actually boarding the boat, particularly at night while we're asleep. The companionway here is the main entrance into the boat. We have the ability to close it and lock it. But living at anchor, especially in the tropics, one of the most important things, especially when you're trying to sleep, is ventilation. And so if we were to completely close up the boat like this, it would get stifling inside. It would be completely miserable. So because of this ventilation problem, the vast majority of cruising sailboats don't lock up at all at night. That just never felt very good to us. Imagine not only not locking your house, but literally keeping your front door open all night. So we've recently come up with a solution that I think works pretty well. So these are what we call our security bars. And so once it's locked, you could break into this, but it would take a tremendous amount of effort and time and tools. Now there is one other way to get into the boat, and that is from the forward hatch. The forward hatch is right above where we sleep here in the V-berth. And so because of that, again, the ventilation is really, really important. Same kind of a thing, we've got security bars. Something that is probably more dangerous and more common than theft or crime at anchor is fire. So to actually lock these bars in place, we have this padlock, and we have a key on either side of the V-berth so that when we're sleeping, we can simply grab a key and then open the padlock quickly, easily, and then these bars can hinge open and we can crawl out. If someone were to try to break in, or even if someone were to just board the boat at night, our plan in general, if we're around other boats or other people, is we have a air horn here. We could just blow that out the porthole to get people's attention. We could also turn on and off our spreader lights. And then finally we could try to contact our neighbors on our VHF radio here. Now another security measure that we have at our disposal but we haven't installed yet is a Pirate Lights security system. This is the self-contained unit. And so it's got a infrared motion sensor, a light, an audible alarm, all in this single water resistant package. You can install it under your hardtop or bimini. And you also have these little key fobs. You can turn the alarm on once you're off the boat, but then before you get back on your boat, you can turn it off and not worry about upsetting your neighbors and making a bunch of noise. And finally, if someone were to board the boat and to actually act aggressive or violent towards us, first of all, we've got these little canisters of pepper spray all over the boat. If people were to board the boat with guns, there's just no way I would just stand here and try to spray them in the face. It's not gonna work. But if someone was apparently unarmed and just acting really aggressive, we've kind of been in situations that get a little bit like, I don't know what this guy's about right now. The pepper spray I feel like is a fairly good deterrent for that sort of a situation. And then we do have a machete. It's definitely not the best tool. Even a baseball bat would probably be better. There was one time we were on our way out of Guatemala that there was 2 fishing boats that were fishing very awkwardly close to Atticus at night. And so I actually just sat up here with the machete and just sort of like waited to see what they were going to do. Now, one option, of course, for self-defense is guns or firearms. Typically, the rules with guns are that when you arrive in a country, you have to declare the firearm. Often, you will have to give that firearm to the customs agents the moment that you arrive in that country, and they're gonna hold it in their office. And if you wanna get it back, you have to go back to that exact same customs office when you leave the country. That's something that is generally not possible when you're cruising. For instance, we're in Panama. We checked into the country here in Bocas del Toro. We will be leaving the country from Panama City on the Pacific side. And also because you have to give the firearm up when you enter most countries, the only times you'll have it with you are going to be when you're underway out at sea.
Now, of course, you could have a gun on board illegally, just not declaring it when you enter into a country, and I think there are some cruisers out there who do that.
Well, we've not met any that have told us about it,
yeah, you wouldn't
right?
want to tell anyone because the consequences are really high. In a lot of places, you go to jail.
So that's the situation with guns and sailors and cruisers. Everyone's got their own opinion on it. So this brings us back to our primary question, which is, are these events so rare that we need to just move on and live our lives and know that very likely nothing bad is ever going to happen to us? Or do we need to realize that there is a very real threat to our lives? It's something that we've struggled with, but what we do know is it's somewhere in between. We can't just ignore the problem. The repercussions of something really awful happening to us are just too terrible. We have to have a strategy to reduce our risk to what we might call an acceptable level. But we also can't live in fear. There would be no point in being out here and doing what we're doing if we weren't willing to trust people. If we're too concerned about just our safety and nothing more, then there's no way that we would have gotten to experience some of those life-changing experiences that we've had and some of those incredible friendships that we've made since leaving the dock in Key West so many years ago when this adventure all began.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I wanted to take a couple minutes to thank some of our newest patrons. So to kick things off, we've got our first mate patrons. So thank you so much to Terry Williams, Frank Delvecchio, Toby Duncan, Dan and Bridget Marcuse, and Chris Howard. And a big thank you to our newest bosun level patrons. So we've got Stuart Grabber, Kenneth Westby, Thayer Bigelow, Paul Chiravale, Ketch Adventurous, and Caroline Lane. Thank you also to our newest deckhand level patrons, Tony Glover, Kathleen Taylor, George Caruthers, Troy Furr, Dogbone, and Teresa Calkins. Finally, thank you so much to our newest deckhand level patrons, David Rivas Leiber, Jurgen Brewer, Peter Beeman, Steve Dugan, James Stanberry, David Longmate, Chandler and Betty Hall, Ricardo Takase, Sailing Murphy, and Milt Clout. Thank you guys so much for all of your incredible encouragement and support. It really means the world to us. Hopefully we'll catch you next week on September 23rd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time for a little bit of Atticus Live, and the following week for our next episode. Take care, guys.